Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we are diving into an essential area of English literature for UGC NET preparation, that is cultural studies. So cultural studies is an interdisciplinary field that explores how culture interacts with power, identity and ideology. So this cultural studies it developed during the mid 20th century, and cultural studies goes beyond the high and low cultural divide, integrating sociology, anthropology, literary criticism and many more. So our aim today would be to understand its foundations, major theories, school of thought and its relevance to the UGC NET exam. So, to begin with our section, let's first understand what is cultural studies. So, if we talk about the definition of the cultural studies is the study of cultural practices, beliefs, and values that is being analyzed in relation to power, ideology, and societal structure. So, some of the key features we can find in cultural studies that it challenges the traditional divides between high art and popular culture. It examines the representation, identity, power relation. The third feature it has that it incorporates theories of feminism, post-colonialism, and Marxism. To understand it better, let's take an example. Let's understand the cultural significance of novels like Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe or The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy in the post-colonial context. So, if you all have read this text, you must have been now understand what I am trying to say to all of you regarding the cultural studies. So now, as we have understood what cultural studies is and what key features we are going to find through our study of this cultural studies, let's now focus on some of the major theorists and key works that we'll find in cultural studies. So first, let's talk about Richard Hoggart. So before I dive more into Richard Hoggart, please make sure that you have a copy and a pen with you. And the important points that I would be dictating, please make sure that you note them all out, because this video is going to be a full-fledged video on cultural studies, and you will find every minor to major detail in this lecture, and this will prepare you for your exam and as well as for your revision. So make sure you have a copy and a pen, and make sure you note everything that I present to you. So let's start with Richard Hoggart, our major key theorist of cultural studies. So, if we talk about Richard Hoggart, so he has a foundational role behind this cultural studies, because Hoggart is considered as one of the pioneers of the cultural studies. He founded the Center of Contemporary Cultural Studies, that is CCS, at the University of Birmingham in 1964, which presents as a landmark of institution that shaped the discipline. We'll talk more about this Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, but as of now, just remember that Richard Hoggart founded the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies in 1964. So, if we talk about his major works, he had written so many works. I have presented here his work list. But I will be only talking about his most major work, that is the Uses of Literacy, from which the questions are being asked. And as for the other works, you can pause the video and please write down his all works. And remember, I have written down it in, please write it down in chronology order. And yes, please remember that Richard Hoggart was born in 1918 and he died in 2014. So please make sure that you remember when he died and when he was born, because they are asking questions the chronology. Make sure they for, let's take an example. They ask question from cultural studies and all theorists of cultural studies, and they ask that arrange them in the chronological order of their death or their birth, or they'll pick a key theorist and they'll ask you to arrange his work in chronological order. So remembering the dates or the year was has become very important while we prepare for our NTA NET examination. So if we talk about his most major work, the Uses of Literacy, that he published in 1957. So this is Hogarth's seminal work that laid the groundwork for the cultural studies. So some of the key themes we are going to find in this Uses of Literacy is that it examines the working class culture in Britain during the mid 20th century. It also highlights the tension between the traditional local cultures and encroaching the influence of the mass media and consumer culture. So what it describes? It describes that how the commercial culture alters the working class community, and they kind of want to vanish, make their sense of identity vanish. So it's kind of a repression of the commercial culture on the working class culture. So Hogarth's analysis of the working class life has inspired some future scholars, including Stuart Hall, to explore culture as a field of study that is interconnected with power, media, and ideology. So in this work, the Uses of Literacy, that is published in 1957. So are you guys making sure that you are noting the important details that comes under each work and each key theorist? Please make sure to note everything down. So some of the key ideas we are going to find in the works of Richard Hogarth in the Uses of Literacy, that he emphasized on the working class culture. So Hogarth celebrated the richness of working class traditions and he focuses on their resilience and unique cultural forms. He also argued that mass media and consumerism were eroding the traditional values and identities, especially in the working class communities. So Hogarth used literature and popular songs, and he also used magazines to explore how ordinary people engage with the culture. So Hogarth's establishment of the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies formalized the academic study of culture, which allows scholars like Stuart Hall, Raymond Williams to expand more on this work. And Hogarth's work also blended sociology, literature, media studies to form the interdisciplinary foundation for cultural studies. And his critique of mass media's role in shaping the cultural norms paved the way for media studies and analysis of the popular culture. So remember, his most famous work was The Use of Literacy, that is published in 1957, and An Imagined Life, that is published in 1992, which was an autobiographical volume of Richard Hogarth. Now let's move forward and talk about Raymond Williams, who was also a most popular theorist of cultural studies. So Raymond Williams was born on 1921 and he died in 1988. So he was a British literary critic, sociologist, and cultural theorist as well. He is considered one of the founding figures of the cultural studies, particularly for his ideas on culture, society, and language. So Raymond Williams' all works often aim to bridge the gap between literature, cultural, and politics. So now let's move forward and understand about some of the major works of Raymond Williams. So here I have presented all Raymond Williams' key books, and I'll try to explain everything about all his major work in a very simplified manner for your better understanding. So please make sure that you listen to this lecture very carefully and attentively. So let's first talk about Culture and Society, that is published in 1958. So, in Culture and Society, his focus was to provide us how the idea of culture evolved from the late 18th century to 20th century. So, Raymond Williams here examines writers like Matthew Arnold, T.S. Eliot, and John Stuart Mill to show how culture reflects these societal changes. And he challenges the separation between the high culture and popular culture. Now let's move forward and talk about his second work, that is the Long Revolution, that is published in 1961. So in this work, his main focus was on the continuation of the culture and society. He discusses how this industrialization and technology has transformed the society, education, and media. As we learned that in his work Culture and Society, that is published in 1958, his focus was on how the idea of culture has evolved from the late 18th century to 20th century, and this long revolution is the continuation of that work, Culture and Society. And here he discusses how industrialization and technology has transformed the society, education, and media. So cultural change is as important as political and economical revolution. To develop the important themes of culture and society, the study of the theory of culture, and an analysis of the stage that reached in the development of a common culture. So this is the first of a two-part review of Raymond Williams' work. Now let's move forward and talk about his third work, that is Marxism and Literature, that is published in 1977. So in Marxism and Literature, he combines the Marxist theory with literary criticism. So his key idea behind this work is that he wants us to know that culture is not a passive reflection of an economy, but an active force that shapes the society. So some of the notable concepts we'll be finding in Marxism and Literature, which is also very much important from the exam point of view, that it has some notable concepts, that is dominant culture, residual culture, and emergent culture. So dominant culture is the prevailing culture of the time, that is prevalent at the period of time. And residual culture is the older traditions that still influence the society. And emergent culture is the new cultural practices that challenges the dominant culture. So these three concepts are mostly asked in the exam, and remember that Raymond Williams gives the concept of dominant, residual, and emergent culture in his work Marxism and Literature, that is published in 1977. Now let's move forward and talk about his other two works, that is Towards 2000, that is published in 1983, and The Country and the City, that is published in 1973. So the country and the city, it focuses or it examines the representation of the rural and urban life in English literature. It also challenges the romantic idealization of the countryside, while it also critiques the urbanization. So the whole idea behind the country and city is that it examines the representation of the rural and urban life in English literature. One of the most famous work of Raymond Williams is Keywords, that is a vocabulary of culture and society, that is published in 1976. So it is an influential dictionary of words that are important to social, cultural, and political thinking. So it mainly focuses and it mainly explains that the historical evolution of important terms that related to the culture and society. It also helps the scholars to understand how language reflects the culture and societal changes. He also published some more works, but they are not that important from the exam point of view. But please make sure that you remember the proper chronological order of his all works, and if possible try to read more about this work on your own, so that you will get a better understanding and you will remember it in a more better way. So, after learning about all the key works of Raymond Williams, let's understand about some of the key ideas that he provided. So, as we already learned, that Raymond Williams is renowned for redefining the study of culture and literature by connecting it to the society, power, and material conditions. So these are some of the key ideas that we'll find presented in all his work. So first, culture as ordinary. What it actually means, let's understand. So Williams argued that culture is not exclusive to elite art or high traditions like opera or classic literature. Instead, culture includes everyday practice, beliefs, customs, and the lives of ordinary people. For example, studying soap operas or folk songs is as important as studying Shakespeare. So, this idea democratized the study of culture, making it an inclusive of popular and working class traditions. Let's move to the second key idea, that is cultural materialism. So, culture is shaped by material conditions like economics, class, and power structure. So, literature and art are not isolated but are influenced by and influence the material realities of the society. So, these are some of the so in cultural materialism we will also find the concepts of base and superstructure. So Williams critiqued the rigid Marxist idea that the economy, which was the base, determines the culture, which was the superstructure. So economy is the base and the culture is the superstructure. So he suggested a more interactive relationship where culture actively shapes and is shaped also by the economy. Let's take an example to understand. A novel about industrialization reflects economic conditions, but it can also inspire the social changes. And now let's move and talk about dominant, residual, and emergent culture. So we already learned that in Marxism and literature, he provided these three concepts, that is dominant, residual, and emergent culture. So through these representation, he talks about that society is not static. It consists of three types of cultural forces, that is dominant, which was the capitalism today, the ruling or mainstream culture of a particular time. The residual culture is the older cultural practice that still exists and influences society. For example, the traditional festivals or traditional customs or beliefs. And the emergent culture, that is the new cultural ideas and movements that challenge the dominant culture. For example, the feminism or environmental activism. These are the emergent culture. So these frameworks helps to understand the cultural change and resistance that it had over the period of time. So language is a reflection of the society and culture. So in keywords approach, you can understand that language is a reflection of society and culture. And Williams studied how the meaning of important words like culture, democracy, individual has evolved over time to reveal the changes in society. For example, the word culture once referred only to framing and cultivation, but it later included the art, education, and everyday practices. And in the country and city, we'll find that William analyzed how literature portrays the rural and urban life. He showed that the countryside is often idealized in literature, while the city is critiqued as a chaotic or corrupt. So, this idea challenges the romanticized notions of rural life and highlights the socio-economic changes that is brought by the industrialization. And now let's move and talk about television and media and cultural reforms from the point of view of Raymond Williams. So, television and other media are not just tools of entertainment. They are the cultural products that shapes the society and ideology. For example, how TV programs reflect and reinforce the societal norms about gender, class, power was we can see and feel. So culture is dynamic, not fixed. culture is always changing and it cannot be reduced to some fixed definition. So it always evolves with social, economic, and political conditions. And literature is not isolated from the world, it is deeply connected to the social, political, economic context of this time. These ideas of Williams bridge the gap between the culture, literature, and society as we talked about, and they challenges the traditional notions of what counts as valuable as culture or art. So his theories mostly tries to provide the tools to critically analyze text, making them essential for UGC NET and literary studies. So make sure you understand about all his concepts, you make sure that you note down all his concepts and all his works in chronological order. And as they often ask questions based on match the following or analytical questions, or some questions that is connected to the Birmingham School of Cultural Studies. So make sure you go through each line or go through the video in a very detailed and attentive manner. Now let's move forward and learn about Stuart Hall. So Stuart Hall was born in 1932 and he died in 2014. So Stuart Hall was a Jamaican-born British cultural theorist and sociologist who played a central role in establishing and advancing the cultural studies, especially during his tenure in Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies at the University of Birmingham. So his works mainly focus on the intersection of culture, media, and power. He wrote so many works, but these two works of his are mostly important. But please make sure you Google the name of Stuart Hall and make sure that you write about his all the works so that you'll remember it, but it's not that important. But we don't have any belief on NTA. He can ask any questions, so please make sure that you also note all his works, including his major works. So now let's talk about his most major work, that is Encoding and Decoding in the Television Discourse, that is published in 1973. So it introduces the encoding and decoding model of communication. We'll learn more in detail about encoding and decoding, but please remember that in Encoding and Decoding in the Television Discourse, that is published in 1973, he introduces the encoding and decoding model of communication. Some of the I'm telling you his works, please make sure that you note it down. The first work was, as we already learned, it was Encoding Decoding in the Television Discourse, that is published in 1973. His second most work was the Work of Representation, that is published in 1997, which discusses how representation constructs the meaning and how it shapes the identity. And his third work was the Cultural Studies Two Paradigms. So it was published in 1980, and this work, Cultural Studies Two Paradigms, it explores the theoretical foundation of the cultural studies, which contrasts the Marxist and structuralist approaches. Now let's talk about his fourth work, that is the Question of Cultural Identity, which is published in 1992. So in this work, he examines how globalization and migration affect the cultural identities. And in this last work, that is Policing the Crisis, that is published in 1978, he co-authored with others, and this work analyzed the media coverage of crime in Britain, and it shows how it reinforces the dominant ideologies and public fear. So now let's talk about his key ideas in detail. So as we already learned, he introduced the concept of encoding and decoding in media studies, and he explains how audience interpret the media. So mostly his these two terms, that is encoding and decoding, was mostly asked in the exam. So let's learn about it. So Hall proposed that communication, especially in media, is the process of encoding and decoding the messages. So media producers like TV, films, they encode messages with certain meanings. So, and audience decode these messages in different ways, influenced by their own cultural background and experience. So what is encoding? So encoding is the media producers, they encode messages with certain meanings, and audience are the decoders who decode these messages in different ways, being influenced by their own cultural background or experiences. So there are three decoding positions like dominant or preferred reading, negotiated reading, and oppositional reading. If we talk about the dominant or preferred reading, the audience accepts the intended meaning that is being provided by the producers. And if you talk about the negotiated reading, the audience partly agrees but modifies the meaning based on the personal views. And if you talk about the oppositional reading, the audience rejects the intended meaning that is presented by the producers, and the decoders, that is the audience, they interprets it oppositely. For example, a news program might encode the message that a protest is disruptive, that is dominant reading. But some viewers may see it as a necessary form of resistance, that is oppositional reading. I hope now, as I gave you the example, I hope now you understood what I want to say in the terms of encoding and decoding. Now let's talk about representation and ideology. So, if we talk about representation and ideology, representation is not a reflection of reality but a way of constructing the reality. Media and culture, they produce the meanings that shape how people perceive the world. Now, if we talk about ideology, ideology is the cultural text and media, they often reinforce the dominant ideologies. For example, capitalism, patriarchy, they are some of the ideologies. So, representation is an active process that involves the power dynamics. It determines how groups like minorities or women are portrayed and perceived. Now, if we talk about some of his other key terms that is presented by Hall, are cultural studies, representation, cultural identity, political intervention. So, cultural studies, Hall's this work, cultural studies, covered cultural studies and hegemony, and he was a key proponent of the reception theory. As we already learned that representation is an active process that involves some power dynamics. It determines how groups like minorities or women are portrayed and perceived. And now, if you talk about cultural identity, Hall argued that identity is not fixed but fluid and constantly evolving and changing. So, cultural identity is shaped by history, language, and culture. He also highlighted the importance of recognizing the hybrid identities, especially in post colonial societies where multiple cultures are being intersected. If we talk about his another key term, that is articulation, so Hall used articulation to describe how different elements of culture and politics come together to create a more meaningful meaning, or we can say a more generative meaning. For example, a political movement might combine economic struggle, cultural symbol, and media narratives to articulate its goals. Now, if we come to hegemony, so Hall built on Antonio Gramsci's concept of hegemony to explain how dominant groups maintain power by shaping the cultural norms and values. And here, media plays a key role in this process by normalizing the dominant ideologies. And if we talk about political intervention, Hall was a chief intellectual critic of Thatcherism, and he coined the phrase before she became a prime minister. Now, if we talk about the particular word Thatcherism, so Thatcherism was a more complex term, we can say. Thatcherism refers to the political and economical policies that is being associated with Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister from 1979 to 1990. So this term Thatcherism represents a significant ideological shift in British politics to emphasize the free markets, reduced government intervention, and individual responsibility. So these are some of the key terms of Stuart Hall that we must know from the exam point of view. And make sure you write down all the works I told you about Stuart Hall, all the works of Stuart Hall. And if not, please Google it and try to note down his every work in chronological order, and try to remember every key terms that I said you in this video, because they are very much important from the exam point of view. So Edward Palmer Thompson was born in 1924 and he died on 1993. So he was a prominent British historian, social theorist and activist. He is best known for his influential work on the history of the working class and his critiques of structuralist and reductionist approaches in historical analysis. So Thompson combined Marxist perspective with a humanistic approach to emphasize the role of human agency in shaping the history. And now if we talk about some of the major works of E.P. Thompson, first comes The Making of the English Working Class, which was published in 1963. And this book was considered Thompson's most influential work, and it was a watershed in the field of social history, and it is a still staple on university reading list. Let's learn why it was still prevalent. Because it is a landmark work that explores how the working class in England emerged as a self-conscious and unified social group between 1780 to 1832. So it focused on the experience, struggles, and culture of the ordinary people during the Industrial Revolution. Some of the key ideas we are going to find in this particular work, The Making of the English Working Class, that class as a process. Thompson defined that class not as a static category, but as something that is made through some shared experience, struggles, and cultural practices. Also, we'll find the role of agency in this work. So this role of agency stressed the active role of individuals in shaping their history rather than being passive victims of the economic forces. So what the role of agency stressed on the active role of individuals in shaping their history rather than being passive victims of the economic forces. His second work is Custom in Commons, that is published in 1991. So this work explores the traditional customs and collective practice of rural England, and it also focuses on how these were eroded by capitalism. Themes include cultural significance of festivals, riots, and labor practice in this work, Customs in Common. Now let's move forward and learn about his Whigs and Hunters, the Origin of the Black Act, that was published in 1975. So this work investigates the Black Act of the 1723, a set of laws introduced to punish some poaching and forest crimes. This work argues that these laws reflect the ruling elite's attempt to control the rural poor and secure some private property. So this whole work, Whigs and Hunters, investigates a Black Act of 1723, which was a set of laws that is being introduced to punish the poaching and the forest crimes that is happening in the country. His other works like William Morris, Romantic to Revolutionary, is another of Thompson's books, and this is a biography of William Morris, which explores his transition from an artist and romantic to a committed socialist and revolutionary. So, this biography highlights the relationship between art, politics, and labor. Please remember that this William Morris Romantic to Revolutionary, published in 1955, was based on the biography of the William Morris. Now, let's learn about Marcel McLuhan. So, he was born in 1911 and died on 1980. So, Marcel McLuhan was a Canadian media theorist, philosopher, and professor, and he was known for his pioneering ideas about the influence of media and technology on culture and society. So, obviously, he became an key theorist of the cultural studies. So, he is often considered the father of media studies. Please remember, Marcel McLuhan was often considered as the father of media studies. His style and innovative concepts reshaped how we think about communication and its impact on human perception. If we talk about some of his works, that is the Mechanical Bride, the Gutenberg Galaxy, the Medium Message, the Medium is the Message, War and Peace in the Global Village, From Cliché to Archetype, The City as Classroom. These are some of the most important works of Marcel McLuhan that I have presented here. So, if we talk about his major works, that is the Gutenberg Galaxy, which was published in 1962. So, this work of his examines the effect of the printing press on society. He argues that print culture transformed the human consciousness by emphasizing some logic and individuality. So it kind of shift from oral culture to print culture, which led to the rise of individualism and nationalism. His other major work, that is Understanding Media, which was published in 1964, analyzes the role of media as an extension of human sense and capabilities. He also introduced key concepts like the medium is the message and hot and cool media. So his another major work, that is the Medium of Message, which was published in 1967. It was co-written with the graphic designer Quentin Fayol, and this work visually explores how media shapes the human behavior and the culture. So media doesn't just convey the content, it changes how we perceive and interact with the world. So, if we talk about some of the key terms of Marcel McLuhan, first we'll find the key idea of medium is the message. So, the nature of medium, example, television, radio, print media, it is more important than the content that it delivers. So, media influences how we think, act, interact, independent of the content it carries. For example, television encourages the passive consumption regardless of whether it shows some educational programs or entertainment. I hope now you understand what this whole idea behind the medium is the message was. Now, if we talk about his another term, that is global village, which was presented in his work War and Peace in the Global Village, published in 1968. So this term global village, it means that with the rise of electronic media, the world became a global village where people are interconnected through instant communication. So as the rise of electronic media happened, the world became a global village where people get connected through instant communication, and the traditional boundaries of time and space become dissolved. So it predicted the rise of the internet and the interconnectedness that it fosters. Now let's move to his most famous term, that is hot media and cool media. Let's understand what it means. So media can be classified based on the level of audience and participation that it required. For example, hot media. So hot media has low participation and it is highly detailed. For example, film and radio. It has low participation of the audience, but it is highly detailed. And in cool media has the high participation and less detail. For example, television, cartoons, they has high participation, but it is not so much in detail we can find the presentation here. So this distinction helps to analyze how different media engage the audience differently. So according to media, the engage that the audience has can be shown differently. His another term, that is media as extension of man. So media and technology are extension of human senses and abilities. For example, the wheel extends the foot and the radio extends the ear and the internet extends the mind. So these extensions alter how humans perceive the world and interact with one another. So McLuhan's ideas has kind of some impact. In media studies, his theories laid the groundwork for the study of media as a discipline. It was influenced by subsequent theories like Jean Boulder, Neil Postman, and McLuhan's ideas like global village and global village. It helps the media to shape the consciousness, anticipated the internet and social media. It also highlighted the relationship between media, culture, technology, which became central to cultural studies. So, some of the key points we need to remember mostly is that the medium is the message and its implication for communication studies, the concept of the global village and its relevance to the digital age, hot and cool media as analytical tools for media and literature, media as extension of human sense and capabilities. So expect some questions like on medium is the message, global village, hot media, cool media, uh, with some examples. They can ask what is hot media, what is cool media, and name the hot media, name the cool media. They can ask some distinction between the hot media and cool media. So please try to remember all the key terms that is presented by Marcel McLuhan from the exam point of view. Now, as we move forward to the other writers after this, I'll be only telling you about all these writers from the perspective of cultural studies, or the key terms they described, how they are relevant from the point of view of cultural studies. Because we are going to learn, when I'll be posting some separate videos on each criticism, we are going to learn about these writers where they would be relevant to the criticism they delivered. But I'm only going to talk about some of the key terms that are somehow important from the perspective of cultural studies, and we must know these concepts from the view of cultural studies. Now, if we talk about Antonio Gramsci was born in 1891 and he died on 1937. So his most famous key concept, that is hegemony, which was the cultural dominance that is maintained through consent rather than coercion. So the ruling class shapes the cultural norms and values to maintain the power that it has. And cultural hegemony is the cultural institution like education, media, religion to perpetuate the status by promoting the ideologies of the ruling class. So Gramsci's concept of hegemony is influenced by the cultural studies, especially in understanding how dominant ideologies sustain the power structure. And his ideas help to analyze how popular culture reflects and resists the dominant ideologies. And one of his most famous work, please note down here, one of his most famous works that is relevant from these cultural studies point of view is Prison and Notebooks, that is started in 1929. Now let's move forward and talk about Mikkel Foucault. And so Mikkel Foucault was born in 1926 and he died in 1984. So his contributions, his some of his key works like Discipline and Punish, which is published in 1975, History of Sexuality, that is published in 1976, The Archaeology of Knowledge, that is presented in 1969. So these are some of the key works that we must remember from the exam point of view. And now if we move forward and talk about the key contribution of his works or key ideas of Mikkel Foucault. So he gave the concept that power and knowledge. Of power and knowledge. So power is not centralized. It operates through institutions, discourses, and everyday practices. And knowledge and power are interconnected. Knowledge system create power dynamics. So remember, knowledge and power are interconnected. Power is what that it operates through institution, discourses, and everyday practices, and knowledge systems create power dynamics. If we talk about his another key idea, that is discourse. So discourse shapes how we think about concepts like madness, sexuality, and punishment. They define what is considered normal and deviant. He also gave another concept that is a panopticism. So panopticism explores how modern society controlled the individuals through surveillance and self-regulation, which was discussed in his work Discipline and Punish, published in 1975. So Foucault's theories are central to analyzing power structure in media, language, and culture. And his ideas of discourse helps to understand how these societal norms and identities are being constructed. Now let's talk about Edward Said, who was born in 1935 and he died in 2003. So his most famous work, Orientalism, that is published in 1978, and his famous concepts, that is Orientalism, where he examines how the West constructs the Orient as exotic, backward, and inferior to justify some colonial domination. So West is the West has the dominant power, and East was seemed as the backward and inferior, that they have shown the East as the backward and inferior just to satisfy or justify their colonial domination. So Orientalism is a discourse that perpetuates the stereotypes about Eastern culture. And if we talk about cultural imperialism, a term being said by Edward Said, it explores how colonial powers impose their values and norms on colonized societies. So Said's work opened discussion on post-colonial identities and representation in literature and media. His ideas helped to critique the Eurocentric perspective in culture and academia. Now let's talk about Pierre Bourdieu, who was born in 1930 and died in 2002. So his key work, his most major work, we can say, is Distinction, which was a social critique of the Judgment of Taste, published in 1979. His key ideas or key terms are most important from the exam point of view, so please listen carefully. That his one of these key ideas was cultural capital. So cultural capital refers to non-financial social assets like education, language, taste, that enable some social mobility. And if we talk about habitus is a set of ingrained habits like habits, skills, and disposition that is being shaped by social structures. And if we talk about field is the social space, for example, art, education, politics, where individuals and groups compete for power and status. So cultural capital was the non-financial social assets like education, language, taste, that enable some social mobility. Habitus is the state of ingrained habits like skills, disposition, which helps to shape the social structures, and field, that is social spaces, example art, education, and politics. So Bourdieu's theories helps us to analyze how cultural practice reinforce some social hierarchies. His ideas of cultural capital explains how culture becomes a means of domination. Now let's talk about Judith Butler. So Judith Butler was born in 1956, and his key contribution was gender performativity, queer theory. So gender performativity, in his this term, we can see that it was said that gender is not innate but performed through repeated behaviors and actions, and these performances are shaped by societal norms and expectations. If we move forward and talk about queer theory, so queer theory challenges some binary understanding of gender and sexuality. It explores how identities are fluid, and it was constructed through some discourses. So Judith Butler's ideas are central to understanding about how culture constructs and reinforces these gender norms, and she also provides tools to critique heteronormativity and explores the gender as a cultural construct. Her most famous work, Gender Trouble, that is Feminism and Subversion to Identity, published in 1990, and Bodies That Matter, that is published in 1993. Now let's talk about Homike Bhabha. So Homike Bhabha's most famous, he was born in 1949, and his most famous work was Location of Culture, published in 1994. So he had contributed immensely to the field of culture, cultural practices, and his key contributions are hybridity, mimicry, third space, and many more. If we talk about hybridity in particular, so hybridity explores how colonized people adopt and transforms the elements of colonial structure, creating some hybrid identities. It also challenges the binary of colonizer and colonized. So hybridity is the mixing of cultures in post-colonial context, and mimicry is the colonized subject that is being imitated by the colonizer's culture, language, and behavior, but in a way that disrupts the colonial authority. Now, if we talk about the third space, so the third space is a space where cultural negotiation occurs. So it is a space where different cultures interact, negotiate, and create new and hybrid meanings. So Bhabha's theories are crucial for understanding the post-colonial identities and the dynamics of cultural exchange. His work critiques some fixed notions of identity and cultural purity. Now let's move forward and learn about some key schools of thought that is most relevant in the field of cultural studies. First is the Frankfurt School. So Frankfurt School refers to a group of interdisciplinary thinkers associated with the Institute of Social Research of the University of Frankfurt. So it was founded in 1923, and they were deeply influenced by Marxism, psychoanalysis, and critical theory. And they also sought to analyze the effects of capitalism, culture, and media on society. So the Frankfurt School is central to cultural studies as it provides some tools to critique mass culture, media, and the ways in which ideology are perpetuated in modern society. So some of the key thinkers of the Frankfurt School are Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Herbert Marcuse, and Walter Benjamin, Jan Habermas, and some of the key concepts we'll find in Frankfurt School that it focuses on cultural industry, which was coined by Adorno, effect of enlightenment, and it also argued that popular culture is mass produced to control the society by promoting this passive consumption and conformity. For example, some blockbuster films or pop music, they argues that these are known as the popular culture. They argues that popular culture is mass produced to control the society, and they promote the passive consumption and conformity. The second one was the Birmingham School. So, as we already learned, the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies was the research center at the University of Birmingham, England, and it was founded in 1964 by Stuart Hall and Richard Hogarth. And it was closed in 2002. So, from 1964 to 2002, it played a critical role in developing the field of cultural studies, which was which and the most it mostly focused on the popular culture and subcultures. Now, if we talk about post-colonial studies, so some of the founders are Edward Said, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, Homi Bhabha, and it examines the colonialism and imperialism's impact on culture to emphasize the voices from the colonized society. So it's mostly focused on the colonialism, imperialism, and cultural representation of the society. So, as I already said, we'll find some great key concepts in cultural studies, that is representation, ideology, hegemony, identity, globalization, power and identity, post colonial perspectives, feminist voices. We'll find all of these concepts in cultural studies that is mostly relevant from the exam point of view. So, just try to remember who gave which concept in his which work, and try to remember how it was being applied in the study of culture and media studies. So, how are you going to apply it in literary studies? So, cultural studies enriches the literary criticism by examining how text reflects or rejects the dominant ideologies. For example, William Shakespeare's plays will find that it examined through power and identity. And in all post-colonial novels, if we talk about Chinua Achebe's novels, Things Fall Apart, if we analyze the cultural hybridity, we'll find that it it was majorly applied. The term of cultural study was majorly being applied in the literary studies. Also, in feminist works, like if we talk about Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak and The Subaltern Speaks, as it highlights the marginalized voice in the post-colonial concepts, we are going to find that cultural studies enriches our understanding of literature by analyzing the power identity, post-colonial perspective, feminist voice. So, uh, we can apply the cultural studies and the literary studies to enrich our understanding of literature by identifying some of the key themes. If we talk about some of what is the relevance of cultural studies in UGC NET English Literature exam, so some of the important topics like key theories and concepts like hegemony, discourse, hybridity, schools of thought, their approaches, application of cultural theories to literary text, questions can be so many different types of questions can be asked from these important topics, so make sure you remember about all these topics in a very detailed manner. And now if we talk about some of the question types that may come from the cultural studies, they can ask some match the following questions. For example, theorists and their works, MCQs on school of thought and concepts, who are the members of Frankfurt School, who are the members of Birmingham School, who are there in post-colonial studies. Or they can also ask some analytical questions on any cultural theories, like who gave the concept of Orientalism, what is the East, what is the West, who was the Orient. So make sure that you go through the lecture in a detailed manner, and please go and Google everything. If you want to know more about any particular theorist or work, please go and Google it and try to read on your own, which will help you to enrich your understanding about the particular work or theorist. So that's it for today's exploration of cultural studies and the schools associated with it. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful or useful, please make sure to hit the like button and share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more amazing content like this. And don't forget to ring the bell icon so that you never miss an update. And if you have any kind of questions or thoughts, please leave them in the comment section below. I would love to hear from you, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Till then, please stay safe and stay healthy.